But for today, we have one of our own. We have Liz Parati here today who's going to speak to us and a little bit of background about Liz. She's the Assistant Project Leader for the Shellfish Program, the Marine Reserves Program, ODF&W here in Newport. Her job is where she monitors and manages the commercial and recreational harvest shellfish here in Oregon. She got her bachelor's at Boston and her doctorate from the University of California, Berkeley. She then spent some time in Hawaii looking at anti-fouling properties of paint before she came here to work with Seeker, which is where I got a chance to work with her. And at Seeker, we worked with the shellfish and estuarine habitats here up and down the coast and looked at population dynamics and fisheries independent research. And so her current work really draws on her background in vertebrate biology, ecosystem ecology, and applies it to resource management. And she's also the president of PERS, which is not the PERS that some of us think about. It's the Pacific Estuarine Research Society, and that is what she's going to talk to us about a little bit today.
Thanks, Ben. Yes, I can't tell you about your retirement today, but what I am going to tell you about is the Pacific Estuarine Research Society. And as Cinnamon mentioned, I do work with the Marine Resources Program at ODFW, but today I'm putting on my hat as the PERS president, which also means I'm a board member on the Coastal and Estuarine Research Federation. Raise your hands if you are or have been a member of PERS. Okay, so a number of people. In fact, well, I'm the current president. I think we have 3 other past presidents here, so if you guys could raise your hands. There we go. Okay. So actually, the Hatfield community has been pretty instrumental in PERS in that I know of at least 5 past presidents that are from Hatfield since 1978 when it was formed. So today I'm going to tell you a little about PERS and SURF in case you're unfamiliar. We do have the 2020 conference coming up here, hosted in Oregon and Florence in April, so I'll tell you a little bit about the details of that. I'm also going to talk about some results, along with Cinnamon's going to kind of take the helm for that. Networking workshop that we had at our previous meeting in Anacortes last year. Those results I think would be pretty relevant to a lot of the people in this audience, whether you're a mentor, a student, or a potential employer. And then we also have some kind of featured fast talks that you might see that at PERS, and that's going to be by a couple of our members. So the Pacific Estuarine Research Society is a nonprofit, nonpartisan society that works towards advancing our understanding of estuarine and coastal ecosystems, specifically in the Pacific Northwest. And this amazing photo from the Oregon Shore Zone Project is of Coos Bay, that just is to remind me to tell you that we work both in estuaries and in coastal systems, but also with the people that not only rely on those healthy systems, but are also stewards of those systems. So we are really, if I had to describe PERS, I would say we're a really tight community of practitioners, and we hail from a pretty diverse backgrounds and professions. We come from academia, industry, non-governmental organizations, state and federal government, as well as tribes. And I would say that a key component that makes PERS really strong within that community is that the focus on making connections. And we have a plethora of types of connections, and some examples are the connections between students and their mentors, researchers and managers, scientists and communicators, and making connections between different types of researchers. For example, physical scientists with ecologists, and a lot of other examples. PERS is one of the 7 affiliate societies of the Federation, SURF, and I'll talk more about that later. So what we do is really science and stewardship, focusing on these systems, and we do a lot of different kinds of things. A lot of disparate disciplines, biology, chemistry, but even like economics and culture. And I would say that a lot of our work is interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and really collaborative. And that a lot of that comes from making those connections. So PERS is the Pacific Estuarine Research Society, and for historical reasons, we didn't throw the C in there for coastal, but we do also work in coastal systems as well. I would say that some of our members and meeting participants have come from Japan through Alaska all the way down through Mexico, but really most of our membership is in Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia as representative of that Pacific Northwest area. And we have annual meetings that rotate through those locations, and this year it's in Oregon. We also work in, diverse, different types of habitats, like you can see in the pictures here. And we work, everywhere from the molecular level all the way up through the regional level. So moving on to SURF, again, kind of a similar message of advancing our understanding in these systems, but more of a worldwide focus. There are now 7 affiliate societies that make up the Federation. PERS, of course, is here on the West Coast, and our counterpart to the south is CARES, which is the California Estuarine Research Society, and they're California through Baja, Mexico. We also have ACCESS, which is the Atlantic Canada, New England, the Atlantic, Southeastern, and Gulf societies. And so pretty much we cover all of the shoreline between of North America, Canada, US, and Mexico.
Was there a question?
Yeah.
Do any of these guys use coastal?
Or
is it all?
No, so that's a good question. So in the names, I think one of the C's in Canada is, SURF was formed after 2 of the original societies, which were AIRS and NEARS. And when they decided that a federation was needed to kind of recruit similar societies to cover a broader geographic range and to be representative of those areas. And people just for, within their own societies voted to keep the original names. I'll let you play around with where the C would go in PERS, and you might find out why. Let that sink in. Okay. So the mission for SURF is really to promote research in estuarine and coastal ecosystems, and to support the education not only of our own scientists, but also the broader scientific community, the public, policymakers, and the media. And to facilitate communication among these different groups. Some of the SURF values and pursuits, which are shared by PERS, are using the best available science and high scientific standards to increase our knowledge about these systems, and to advance our understanding and models and methods in these fields through collaboration. Obviously, high ethical standards and integrity are not only fundamental to science, but also to SURF as a federation. And we always try to couch our work to make it relevant to the broader community and the world in general. Education, I think, is a real main tenet for both SURF and PERS. And again, not only educating our own scientists, but also the next generation of scientists, our students. As well as we're in this realm of coastal and estuarine science, but also going out to the broader scientific community, and of course other audiences, stakeholders like the public, decision makers, and the media. And finally, by synthesizing the best available science, we're able to integrate that into our broader understanding of the world. And finally, outreach, not only engaging our communities, our scientific communities, but also conducting outreach to all those different groups that I mentioned. So if any of this kind of resonates with you, or you're already doing some of these things and you want to help SURF and PERS meet their mission, feel free to get involved, and one way to do that is to become a member. So I just wanted to talk about some added value that you might get by being a member of either PERS or SURF. First, you belong to a really strong network. PERS, as I mentioned, is for the Pacific Northwest. We do have annual meetings. We have other things as well. And as a PERS member, you get access to funding from the Federation. So for example, there's an RFP out now for people to submit to organize regional workshops on topics that are of regional importance. And those would be conducted sometime between August this year through next June. And you would only have access to that pot of money to develop a workshop like that if you were a PERS member as an affiliate. We also, SURF also supports funding for local events, and this could be getting together a group of scientists or other audiences, like an event similar to our Science on Tap, for example. Stay on top of the latest. You get, as a member, you get of SURF, you get free access to the estuaries and coast, as well as wetlands journals, and some other things on Springer and Wiley. And we also have the PERS newsletters that come up, as well as the Surf's Up newsletter. And the Surf's Up in particular is a nice place to get featured some of your important work that you want to disseminate, because that really kind of brings up the level and makes people more aware of what you're doing. Conference discounts, of course. So I mentioned that PERS has an annual meeting. There's a biennial meeting for SURF. Next year will be in Richmond, Virginia, and in 2 years it's returning back to Portland because it was really successful last time and people really liked the location. Learn new skills and explore new avenues. SURF has a really great webinar series that is free access to members, and I'm just going to read a couple because I never remember them, but I've actually found them really useful. Some of the recent topics that they've had in the webinar series are applying for fellowships, how to thrive in soft money positions, working with journalists, what consulting is like as a career, blending ways of knowing using traditional ecological knowledge for management, telling a compelling story, and using effective social media. So those are the types of topics that you would see in the webinars, and they're updated every few months. Find your next job, internship, or funding. So we do have a job board with SURF, and we have a listserv through PERS that also highlight different types of things, and is a way for you to kind of disseminate information if you're trying to recruit as well. Support a diverse and inclusive community. SURF has what's called the Rising Tides program, and TIDES is toward an inclusive, diverse, and enriched society. And it's a pretty comprehensive program to promote diversity and inclusion within the Federation. It includes specific funding for those initiatives, special sessions and workshops centered around diversity and inclusion, as well as leadership training and other things. And be a leader in these fields. You know, you can help shape the future of PERS and the Federation by becoming a member and even serving on a position as well. If you want to learn more information, you can go to pers/irf.org or surf.science. And before I talk about the meeting, are there any questions or comments about either PERS or SURF that people have? Yeah, Brett, former past president, by the way. Yeah.
We're just going to mention CESN too, which is one of the ways that SURF gets the message out to managers and mostly management. So they take all each article.
That's right.
We select articles. I'm on the group that selects articles. We select articles that have a really good management outlook, and then they get written up in a short paragraph sort of form and disseminated to managers online.
Right.
What does the acronym stand for?
That's news. Yeah, so it's a news. So yeah, it's a so I didn't know you were on that group there. So yeah.
Yeah, and so to amplify off that is connected to the journal that SURF produces, which is Coast and Estuaries, and that's a pretty influential journal for this type of science.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So because it's a federation that covers a pretty large geographic range, you may hear about things that are well known in those regions, but not necessarily well known in your region. So that's another way to access that information so that we're not kind of reinventing the wheel in all these locations. Thanks. Anything else? Okay. So come to our next meeting. It's actually going to be a joint meeting between PERS and the California Estuarine Research Society this April 2nd through 4th at the Florence Event Center in Florence. And the theme for this year is Shellfish to Salmon, Science in the Face of Changing Ocean Conditions. The abstracts are due coming up March 12th. You can access all that information in the registration page at our main page here. And we do have blocked rooms at the Driftwood Shores. It's particularly of importance for students that we blocked out condos that can house 4 to 6 students. So if you're a group of students, that would be a good way to get your housing down there as well. In terms of the dates, the second is generally our social mixer in that Thursday evening, and then the programming is that Friday and Saturday, and it includes a banquet where we'll have a surprise speaker. So you should come. In case you're wondering, well, would I be interested in the kind of topics, or is my work relevant to this? Here are just some topics that I anticipate seeing on the program. They always include different types of population and community ecology and biology. Talks about connectivity, ocean acidification and hypoxia, restoration, climate and emergency preparedness, HABs, biogeochemical cycles, fisheries, SAV and the methods associated with that, microplastics, UAS and other technologies, invasive species, and traditional ecological knowledge. Those are just some of the things I think will be featured. So to kind of kick us off is Francis Chan, who's going to be our keynote speaker that Friday morning. And we'll also have a fish printing workshop led by local artist Bruce Quakey. And we have limited spaces for that. So if you register now, you can get your spot. We do have student travel awards, and I just wanted to talk specifically about some benefits to students too, some student support. We do have student travel awards which you can apply for online. You do have to be a member of PERS for all of this, that I should mention for students, that's $10 a year. And this is from the Millicent Quammen Fund. She was a researcher at UCSB that was originally a member of PERS before we split off into the two societies. There's also student research funds that we give out multiple research awards on an annual basis. It's usually between $500 and $1,000, so that's a little bit of money to get some travel and some supplies. And then we also have meeting awards, and depending on who's in attendance, we usually separate it between undergraduate and graduate categories, posters and presentations, and we usually have a winner and an honorable mention award. For each of those categories, and the winners will get a 1-year SURF membership as well as a cash prize, and the honorable mention will get the SURF membership. In addition, we have the Don Hunley Award for the best graduate student presentation, and in addition to those other prizes, they're also sent to the whatever the next SURF meeting is. So that would be the meeting to Richmond, Virginia. Okay. Any questions about the meeting before we move on? Okay, hope to see a lot of you there. So one thing I did want to, yeah, Gail.
Awards like WSN and a couple other societies have an award that they give to one scientist a year for their expertise. Does PERS have anything like that they give to them?
We don't have that kind of fundraising. Yeah.
Yeah. Students, you should have one for regular scientists.
Yeah.
Because it's a nice honor to have.
Yeah,
I'm just
that's true.
suggesting it.
I'll put it on the export agenda.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Okay, great, thank you. The next is talking a little bit about last year's meeting, which was in Anacortes, Washington, near Fidalgo Bay. And the theme for that meeting was building the workforce of tomorrow in coastal and estuarine science. And that's just a word cloud of some of the abstracts we had at the meeting. And I should mention, SURF is starting to investigate developing a professional certification for estuarine scientists. This would be recognized similarly as they have in Canada, where specific skills are kind of recognized, and it's a standard curriculum and different skills that people would have, and it would be recognized by employers. And so actually one of our current past president, Jason Stutz up in Washington, is kind of leading the charge on that and developing that and communicating with different types of employers to see how to make this valuable, and then working with academic institutions to make sure that we can provide those skills. So in thinking about the next generation of scientists that would fit into coastal and estuary science, we came up with maybe a networking session workshop during the last meeting. And what we really wanted to know is, is the next generation of scientists moving into these fields prepared? Are they prepared for moving in and being successful in these, diversity of professions? And if, are there any gaps in their training? And if so, what are they? And so with that, I'll switch over to Cinnamon, who's going to talk about the collaboration between HMSC, which had very similar goals in figuring this out, in the Oregon STEM Hub. Let me just switch off here.
Okay. So my name is Cinnamon Moffett. I work here at Hatfield as the Research Facilities Coordinator, but I have a long background with estuarine science. And so I've been working for part of my career either supporting coastal planners in data visualization or working with Tony and Liz at Seeker doing field biology. And so I've had an experience with PERS, and so Liz and I were talking about this and just thinking about it and trying to figure out how Hatfield's kind of growth in their student population and their development of new programs, and thinking about transdisciplinary kind of work and this idea that we want to start to engage our students in more hands-on experiences and how to integrate research into classes, and just all these kind of ideas that we're kind of going into as we start to grow. And we realized that the work that PERS was doing kind of overlapped with some of the stuff that we were doing here at Hatfield. And so we came up with this idea to do a workshop at the meeting in Anacortes last year. And so Liz and I worked with Lisa Blank, with this is the STEM Hub, who has some more expertise in this workforce development kind of idea, to think about how we wanted to collect a point-in-time data set from those experts in the room. And so we had the three of us working together, and then we actually pulled 4 ethnographers from 3 different programs to work with us on this as well. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the results of that experience. So the goals of the workshop was really, kind of Liz hinted at this, is to understand the jobs in the estuarine science in the future, to understand the skills that those folks would need for those jobs, both as a student learning those skills and the professionals that need to be able to employ those students. And then to look at the mismatch between what students are learning and what they need, or what folks don't think they need but students are learning and might really advance the career as we move forward. And then trying to think about what we needed to do to support that pathway development. So we went up to the conference, and I was the moderator of this particular event, and we were given just shy of 2 hours where anybody at the conference was able to attend with no other events happening. And so that meant that we had 61 people participate in this workshop for nearly 2 hours. So I was really, really excited to see that kind of engagement from the PERS workshop participants. The folks that were in the room are indicated up here. We had a good representation of students, of resource managers, of industry representatives, of academics, and others. So other is kind of one of those that I wish I had done a little bit different. People were standing up as I called out potential groups. Others were folks like NGOs, statisticians, and people that didn't feel that they represented in one of these others. And so even a couple of field biologists who said they weren't really in management, didn't see themselves in that, came into the others. But overall, we had a pretty good mix of the audience that we were hoping to find to be able to look at this and answer these types of questions. So what did we find? And at the bottom, you can kind of see how I'm moving through that same kind of diagram from the job all the way up to our next steps. We had basically, we broke up the room into 8 different tables. At those different tables, we had leaders that helped us kind of stay on track because we knew we were asking a lot, even though we had this 2-hour block. And then the 4 ethnographers were spread out, and they were basically recording what people were saying and trying to give context to the data that we were collecting. And at those different tables, the first thing that we asked them to do was to come up with one job title they wanted to work on that they thought might be relevant in the future. And so those 8 tables came up with 8 different job titles, but they fell into these 3 different categories. They were either project or program managers, field biologists, or policy folks. And so that is kind of where I'm going to kind of base what we're going to do next on those things. I am too fast with my clicker. Okay, so once they had decided what job skill they wanted or job they wanted to focus on, we asked them to come up with a list of both the hard skills and the soft skills a person doing that job might need. And so they basically made a whole list, and we ended up with like 300 different job tasks over these different groups. I then took those job tasks and coded them into what we called skill sets. What I have listed up here are the skill sets that came out of this workshop, and the most surprising thing to me is it didn't matter if it was a manager or a field biologist, these skill sets came across at all of those different job titles. So what I have up here, communication skills, budget and managing grants, project management, science basics, all the way down to things that were more of the soft skills, the people skills, the critical thinking, the creativity, and personal character. The only one that fell between both hard and soft was communication. There were most definitely communication skills that people considered a hard skill. Hard meaning that it was a task that you could learn. A soft skill is more like this experience about how you feel about something, and it's just the way you approach something or the way you come at something. So communication kind of spread between that. And I'm just going to go back here and make sure. So communication included things like social media, science writing, public speaking, where contrasting that with people skills, it was more of like networking, team playing, being respectful, collaboration. So that was just some of the skills that came out along on our skill sets. And feel free to stop me if you have questions about any of this as we go along. So once we got all those skills, we wanted to do a little bit of validation. We wanted to see, because the tables were split out, so there's about 8 people or so at a table. They were working on their particular job title. They were coming up with their skills. We wanted to see if the room kind of agreed with that, or if there were skills that were missing, or those kind of things. And so we did what we called a validation process. We hung up these posters with these cute little people, filled with all the skills on their different Post-it notes all around the room, and we asked everybody in the room to go around and put a sticker on a skill that they either in their current job that was closely related to the job on the job title that they were already doing. And then we asked our students to go around and say, what skills are you actually learning in your programs? Then you can see we ended up with all these great little dots, but we had some where we didn't have 2 colors on the skill set. That's a mismatch for this point-in-time data set. So it really depended on who was in the room and what poster they went to see. So that is definitely an issue that we had. But we really then wanted to focus on those mismatches so we could see what we needed to do to improve this pathway. We took those validations and we went back to our individual tables, and everybody just started talking about them. Is this a real data gap? Is this somebody didn't put the right sticker in the right place? What does this really mean? How do we move this forward? And what we asked each table group to do was really then use that validation as a starting point to identify some gaps that they thought they might be able to see. And we asked them to list the top 3 hard data gaps and the top 3 soft skill set data gaps. And then they had to get down to just 1 of each. And that resulted in this. So we basically see that we had gaps in almost all the skill set lists that we originally came up with. That was not what I was expecting to see. I was expecting to see that something would really come to the forefront. But again, that communication thing did come out. Almost every table said, we are not teaching our students the right way and the skills that they need to be able to communicate with social media, with science writing, with diverse public, with traditional knowledge. I mean, we just were missing those kind of things. And so that was definitely a result that we're going to spend a little bit more time trying to explore as we dig deeper into this data. Questions?
Yeah, Simon?
Yeah.
A question. So, you know, one of the criteria for students is what are they learning or not learning. So I would think something like personality isn't really taught, right? I mean, in most programs. So of course that's going to come out as not learning, right? How does that?
Right. So these are that skill set cluster. What they were actually evaluating were those individual skills. Okay. So when it was personality, it was flexibility and adaptability and resilience and perseverance, and those kind of skills were the things that were listed. And most of those, as you can see, only one group came and said it was a personality that our students are not coming out of the programs ready to be in the field with that particular thing. So that's a little bit harder to quantify, but with the other ones, like, man, grants and budgeting, most undergraduate students have no idea how to work with grants or budgeting. But every single one of our tables talked about the fact that that is a skill you must have, even as a field biologist, to be able to track whatever your budget is. So that was a skill set that we are not doing a good job of teaching our students that is needed in order for us to be able to have an effective workforce in the field. Yeah?
So you guys think about, so there's explicit learning and then there's transferable skills.
Mm-hmm.
And so did this engender any discussion about like how, okay, we're not explicitly teaching you communication, but you are learning it through these various exercises?
Yeah, thank you. That will be next, so I'll just talk about that in just a second. Perfect. Any other questions about this? And again, these are summary statements, and so we are losing some of the fine level details, and we'll talk about this also, but the idea is that the work that we did at this particular workshop is going to turn into a white paper. White paper will be handed out to different folks, and then we'll probably inform some of the webinars that Liz had talked about a little bit so that we start figuring out a way to support our workforce development in that way.
Cinnamon, one other question about that. You know, some of the skills, it seems to me, are skill sets, like project and program management, as well as the budget and grant sort of things. I suspect that many of the people in this room probably learned a lot of those things as part of their on-the-job sort of skill sets, and they developed over that time period. Was there much discussion about that aspect of things?
Yeah. Did you want to answer that question?
I was there as a grad student, and I can say that when you apply for a job right now, they want you to have those skills already. And so there was a lot of graduate students that felt like we were behind the 8 ball with that. And so that was a big part of that discussion. It's not that, you know, you're not getting taught because everybody sucks or something. It's because, you know, right now, instead of being able to learn on the job anymore, it's required. You have to know. You have to have at least some experience. And so there's a gap when you put your application in. That's kind of why that came up.
And a lot of the discussion that I recall was also that while they may have the skills or the qualifications to get into a like lower level position, those types of skills that you're required to move up are what's lacking in that workforce, and they're not given the opportunity at those lower levels to learn those skills.
I would think at a graduate student level you would get, I mean, obviously you're managing some project and there are some funds and you've got some level of that goes into that, but I can see where
And the other
The ability to articulate that you have those skills, that is lacks.
that's the communication.
how do you sell yourself? Yeah, there was some discussion as well about whether you had been exposed to it and whether you really could apply it. So there was different levels of what you had learned in your academic program as well. But to talk a little bit about where this was going is that the ethnographers in the room really helped us start to refine some of the conversations that were happening, because the way we designed the workshop, the data that we were gathering was really helpful, but without the context around it, we were missing a lot of the discussions and understanding of that kind of stuff. So I just pulled 2 of these from the ethnographers' descriptions about some of the discussions that were addressing the data gaps that we just talked about. One of them was a little bit what Liz was talking about, that a lot of folks are coming out of their undergrad, at least, program ready to do a field biologist job with no skills to be able to continue to move up in the field and to get to that manager level position. And so that was something that was a discussion on almost every single table, as I remember. How do we make sure that folks have those skills? Is it learned? Is it mentoring? Is it, and it's not necessarily saying that it needs to come from the academic program, but how are folks getting those skills to be able to move forward? The other one was a little bit more of that soft skill stuff that we were talking about. Creative thinking was something that came up as something of a concern for some folks. Where is creativity taught? How can it be taught? Is there a way that we can teach without stifling it? So those kind of conversations were happening around those soft skill kind of ideas.
Cinnamon, just
Yeah,
quick question.
please.
You know, I'm no education expert, but you know that lower one there, a lot of that stuff is like taught in grade school or earlier. And So was there any discussion about that? It might not be a college teaching, it has to go back before that.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we involved Liz in the STEM Hub, because they're really thinking about this pathway. And I was really kind of focused originally on the academic connection because that's where I sit. That's where, you know, I live at the moment. But when we're talking pathway, again, not only are we talking about how we move up into a management position, where do we start with them? And how do we make sure that they're coming into the undergraduate program ready to be able to think about that, think critically, to be able to process, for sure. And then there was just so many great discussions, whether it came out in the data analysis kind of piece, but there were people talking again about interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary kind of work, which was really exciting for me to hear because that's something we're focusing on here. How do we make sure that our students get access to that as young students all the way up into their undergraduate and graduate programs, that they're not channeled so tightly into one type of focus. They're not able to have experience with literature and those kind of things, which would help with our science communication. Another one that came up was the whole idea of these internships. Everybody knows that internships are incredibly important, but if you've ever run one, you also know how much time they take. And so how do we make sure that internships aren't the only way that our students get hands-on experience as they start to get into the job market? How do we integrate hands-on learning into the programs at the undergraduate and even in the high school and even earlier so that they're ready for that and it's not such a big jump when they start to get into the field? And then PERS, because it is kind of this great collaboration of all these different folks, really started talking about traditional knowledge and how we integrate that into our science learning. A lot of students that were in the room said they hadn't even been introduced to how you integrate that into kind of a research project. So that was something that was really interesting. So what's next? This is just a really cursory level review of what we did at that workshop. But like I said, we're hoping to get together a white paper that'll be shared with PERS and SURF, and then hopefully be used to inform some learning opportunities to help strengthen that pathway as we move forward. And it really was just the start of the conversation, because you had 61 people, which I was really happy, but it's only 61 people kind of in a one point kind of collecting that data. So we're excited to see how this moves forward. This is the STEM Hub. Lisa Blank's STEM Hub, Oregon STEM Hub is located here, and so they really focus on how to support science education, STEM education from K through 12.
Has there been much discussion about expanding that to the other, you know, the rest of SURF? I mean, it seems like a natural direction to
Right. So I think, originally had grand notions for what was going to come out of this workshop, and I think the white paper is kind of the way to start the conversation. But SURF definitely wants to take this, you know, many steps further and kind of develop a, like, you know, here's how to get a job in these kinds of fields. And so, you know, eventually I think maybe with lessons learned and other information through that white paper, we'll be able to share that with SURF, and that'll be disseminated at the Richmond meeting, and I think it'll kind of go from there and see how the other societies kind of take the charge with that. So I do see it as being a really important experience, and for us kind of testing this as like a start of the conversation. And I think it's something that you're going to see progress with, not only within PERS, but through the other societies within the Federation. Okay, so that's it for me, and then I think you need to pull up another. So is that Ted that's next? Ted. Ted, you're next.
I'm Ted DeWitt. I work at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I'm a marine ecologist and have been here at Hatfield since '85 and doing work in a variety of areas in toxicology and estuarine ecology. I want to talk today about some research we've been doing in support of ecosystem services research, which is one of the research thrusts at EPA nationwide. Our group over here also has a big focus in water quality issues, but one part concerns ecosystem services. How do you quantify those? How do you incorporate those into decision making, particularly at the local level? This is a project I undertook with two other folks, Nate Lewis and Eric Fox, both of whom have now moved on to other opportunities. But here we wanted to look at how do you go about quantifying fishery stocks, particularly shellfish that are used recreationally and commercially. Oh, is this it?
Yep.
All right.
Oh, there's no pointer. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. We have this issue that coastal communities are in part dependent on coastal fisheries, and clamming, recreational clamming and commercial clamming occurs in our estuaries, and they are important to our local commerce and to people's diets as well. And managing estuaries so that they can produce those fisheries, that ecosystem service in a dependable way is an important question that many people have worked on, and ODFW is charged with principal responsibility in that area. And EPA is concerned because this is seafood that people eat. We want to make sure it's safe, and but quantifying the abundance and distribution of shellfish is expensive and it's laborious. I need hardly tell half the people in this room who have been engaged in trying to do that at one level or another. So we wondered if there might be a way that we can begin to approach that in another way. And so we undertook this study focusing on 5 of the bivalve species that are common to our estuaries and are harvested recreationally. And as you can see from the map, these are species that are widely distributed along the west coast here. And our approach was to create habitat suitability maps for each species that were based on existing information on the natural history characteristics of these organisms, their tolerance for a variety of ecological factors. And after reviewing the literature on each of these 5 species, we settled on 4 factors, and in part this is informed by the availability of data on those factors, on their response to grain size, their response to salinity, particularly in the wintertime, so low salinity events, the presence of burrowing shrimp, and water depth, the bathymetry. And basically, we're looking at in the blue bar, that's where the organism would either grow, the literature say they would grow, they would occur, they would survive, or in the white where they would die or be absent in stuff. So we just combed the literature, built these very simple kind of binary, this is suitable in the blue and this is in the white is unsuitable for each of these species. And that's something to keep in mind as we go forward. We then went out and we looked for data on each of these variables, spatially referenced data, and then using GIS, we interpolated those data to generate these habitat feature maps. So it's a sediment finds, salinity in the wintertime, water depth, and presence absence of burrowing shrimp. This map over here shows all the data points from which those that contributed to the development of these data sets, these maps. And we defined habitat suitability at any particular point. So look at this little A here right off the Marine Science Center here. And we asked, okay, at that point, what is the value of that? Oh, must be. At that point, what was for each of these habitat variables, what was the condition? So at point A, the sediment fines was 5.4% fines, plus 0.6 meters and so on. And then we compared that to the tolerance range for each species at that point. So in this case, the tolerance range for cockles with respect to fines is as long as there was less than 39% fines, it would be a tolerant place, so we would score it as a 1. If it was intolerant, we would score it as 0. And we would sum up for each of these 4 factors to a possible high score of 4 and a possible low score of 4 for the total habitat suitability. So in this case, because it was suitable in all these, for all 4 of these variables. It got the highest possible score for cockles at that one spot. And then we applied that across all of the 2 by 2 meter pixels within this to then develop these maps where the most suitable habitat is in red and the least suitable is in dark blue for each of these 5 species. And so you can see these maps that, you know, for cockles in particular, they are, you can find them in deep water, you can find them in lower intertidal, and so at least this was the forecast. This was where they would occur.
Ted, the burrowing shrimp, it's pretty binary as far as where you're interpreting. And you're looking at a 2 by 2 meter transect. If there's no, okay, if there's no burrowing shrimp in that area then, and you...
Well, this was interpolated, so yes, it's from the point data that we had. So it's pretty coarsely interpolated models. But
well, I just don't understand how you valued the burrowing shrimp presence or non-presence.
It was based on the initial data. Were there burrowing shrimp present in the sample that was taken at a point or not? And then we took that presence-absence data and interpolated that forward.
So, for example, the cockle beds right out here that you're really familiar with, and where the burrowing shrimp beds are, they're really adjacent, if not on top. I mean, I breed cockles right beside burrowing shrimp.
Well, let's just keep going forward and see what we learned from this. And what we did was then to take to validate these models. I mean, it's not perfect, but this is a pretty coarse approximation. What we did was we took existing data on the distribution of benthic in fauna from data sets that we found ranging over 96 to 2012, just anywhere we can find data, and we coarsened that down to presence absence of these 5 species at each point that was available to us, where there were geospatial references, and then laid those over the map, and we said, okay, what's the probability of occurrence from those of cockles in an area where you have 4, 3, 2, or 1 of these habitat suitability scores. So what we found is where the habitat was most suitable, we had the most, we found the highest probability of occurrence, and where we had the lowest habitat suitability, we found the lowest frequency. So take it, these models are built without reference of the actual distribution of the clams. It's just based on their tolerance to these ecological factors. And then we went out and said, okay, do the clams occur where we would forecast that the habitat was most or least suitable? And that worked out well for all 5 of these species. And furthermore, the model, we've applied it elsewhere in 2 other estuaries. For example, here's data for cockles in Tillamook with a similar high confidence in the result. Our conclusions that we can build these accurate, at least to the extent that we measured accuracy models. They're low cost because we didn't have to collect any data. Of course, it depends on being those data sets being available to use, and the information is transferable. But also from this, you can get an idea of the kind of data that you might want to collect if you wanted to get a map like this. They're useful for identifying areas where there might be some importance for conservation or restoration. It can inform sampling designs for stock assessments, and it can be used in giving you some ideas of for forecasting environmental change. So we can play, for example, with the effects of sea level rise, like changes on the salinity distribution and on the water depth, and look to see what that might say about how the clam stocks might respond. So that's it. So.
Thanks, Ted. I
think we have time for one or two questions if anybody has them.
Move on.
Okay.
And I'll be here, and we can talk more about that later.
Great. Great. Moving on. Thank you very much. Our next speaker, our fast talk is, let me find your talk. Dorothy Horn, who is a PhD candidate at PSU.
Okay, hey, my name's Dorothy. Some of you I see around because I also work in the VC, so I can play with the octopus while I live here in Newport. That's really why I'm here. So I study microplastics, super fun. It's kind of sad, actually. And I'm going to talk a little bit about one of my more recent projects that Liz has hooked me up with all the crabs for. So if you've never seen this picture, maybe, I know you guys all read in here. So there's trash everywhere in the ocean. It's a problem. Every piece of plastic sinks. It doesn't always start out that way, just like you float in the ocean, but you sink in a lake, same kind of concept. After about 48 hours, every single type of plastic sinks, and it ends up in the bottom, which means that it's in the benthos zone, which is where I am going to be working. Go forward. So everybody wants to know about what kind of size plastics these are. You guys have a dog? All right, so the big stuff is like the size of chihuahuas. Then you have macroplastics, they're like moths, or maybe like your thumbnail size, okay? Mesoplastics, or maybe your pinky nail size. We see a ton of those in the winter here in Oregon. It's like confetti coming in the waves. It's pretty gross. Then we have microplastics, which is smaller than the width of your pinky nail, all right? And then really so you can't see them. That's the little code. Then we have nanoplastics. These are actually kind of scary. You can breathe these in. So right now you're all breathing in microplastics. It's really awesome. No one thinks that's funny. It's okay. There's two different types, all right? This range is 5 millimeters to a micron, which is really for NOAA. We're trying to get a different rating right now, but it's not quite finished yet. We have two different kinds of plastics. The kinds that are made like the stuff that makes your cell phone cover, like Nurdles. So you melt those down into a mold that makes your cell phone cover. Microbeads that were banned but are still in a lot of products. So if you want to know if you're still brushing your teeth with microbeads, you can talk to me later. And then we have secondary plastics like a G.I. Joe arm or like a chunk of something that you can't really tell what it is. Tire dust is a huge one. There's a big model that just came out of San Francisco Bay showing that tire dust is one of the main types of plastic that is in the water environment, which is yummy. You guys want to eat tire dust, right? And then microfibers from washing your clothes. This is really important for this particular section of research. So we used to just kind of clump everything as like strings or chunks, and now we're learning to clump things in a lot of different categories. And the reason that this is because some of these are primary plastics and some of these are secondary. And fibers has a whole special thing. Everybody always asks me at the end, can I just wear cotton and it would be okay? No, it's bad too. Every time you wash your clothes, it releases a ton of fibers into the environment. You guys know that when you flush your toilet, where that goes. Same concept for your washing machine water. It goes out into the reclamation plant. They don't have the technology to filter that out. It would be like putting a screen on the end of a hose that pumps 8 million gallons of water a day. They are able to capture about 92 to 93% of all those fibers, but there's so many coming out, because I know you guys all wash your clothes because it doesn't stink in here. So think about just our room. We have it in our salt, our beer, and our tap water. That's not my research, that's somebody else's. The reason it's gross. Plastic is made with cancer-causing chemicals, all right? We have phthalates that we know cause all kinds of problems, anti-static agents, and flame retardants. Those alone we know cause issues, and that they leach out of plastics themselves. And then as soon as it goes out into the environment, it acts like a little piece of chemical Velcro, and it changes based on how much sun has touched it or not, or the water and whatnot, and then other things attached to it. Super gross. Okay, in Oregon, high school students really helped me, because when I first got here, I didn't know how to get to the beach, because you have to like climb to the beach everywhere. I'm from Southern California, where you park, like walk 15 feet and go surfing. Yeah, all right. So there's plastic in our beaches, okay? So this is just 19 beaches that we tested to kind of see, because when I first got here and talked to folks in Oregon about plastics, they're like, we don't have that here. It's very clean. Look at the beach. It's very pretty. That's not true.
So these are the small ones. The lighter color is fibers. The darker colors are particles. We used lipophilic dye to just tell if it was a polymer or not, just to get started. And I'll explain that in a second. Yes? Oh yeah, of course, sure. So it's on this, x-axis here is 60, 0 to 60 pieces in a 200 milliliter sand sample. I apologize, this is supposed to be a fast talk, so I cut out like all the good slides. Yeah, so it's like basically a scoop of sand. We shake it up with super salty water, just hypersaline. Then you let it float most of it up. You filter it over a glass fiber filter and then stick it under the microscope and start identifying. Then to see if it's really plastic or not, because everything is not plastic in the environment, we use a lipophilic dye called Nile Red, which I know some of you know what that is. And it kind of tells you if it's a polymer or not. It doesn't tell you what it is, but it gets us like to the next step. Because the machine that identifies plastic is as much as your car, well, your house. All right, so this is my research that we're working on. Dungeness crab that everybody really likes. Trying to see if they are also affected or ingesting microplastic. These are just some fun pictures. The one day I got to go out with Liz and she laughed because a wave splashed in my face every time I tried to take a photo. It's cool. These are our sites. So we have a couple bay collection sites, then we have some pelagic collection sites. I also have some megalopi that I'm not going to talk about today from a couple of the bays, just so you guys kind of know what we collected. I'm separating them into 6 parts. You guys know how big these crabs are, right? You ever had to digest a crab? No, like maybe not eat it. You know how long it takes? Well, in a jar with a base, it's not really an acid, it smells really gross and it takes 24 hours. So I separated them into 6 pieces because people care about what they eat. It freaks people out. It's really good for publicity. Not really. So there's body and leg tissue. We squeeze I squeeze the poop out of their telson, okay? And then gills. The reason we are separating gills is because an East Coast researcher in blue crab, crabs trap a ton of stuff in their gills, and they found plastics there, so that's why I'm looking at that. They have a great stomach that you can just pluck out, like what's that old game where you touch the edges and it buzzes? It's kind of like that. And then the rest of the organs, because once they're frozen, then they just get all melty and gross. I digest it in a KOH solution, potassium hydroxide. This method has been tried and true to leave plastics, cotton, and cellulose, which is really important because we're finding that not just microplastic fibers are causing issues, also other types of fibers are causing problems. I use a copper filter, and that's a staged photo. Nothing looks that cute in the lab, right? We look for stuff. This is the kind of stuff I'm finding. These are all zoomed in. So just fibers. I can't tell you what it is yet, but it's digested different pieces, and it looks like string. Sometimes they're clear, sometimes they're colored, sometimes it's chunky. So we find these, then we plate them, then we take them to the machine that costs as much as your house, and we zap through a diamond, a little ray of light, and the reflectance gives you a DNA readout of the microplastic. It's FURIO for something, transformation infrared spectroscopy is what it's called. I'm going to work with my old undergrad advisor because they just got one, SCORE. I can do some grunt work, and they're going to let me use their machine. You have to put it on a gold-plated slide. It has to do with the light stuff. So then I can tell you if it's plastic or not. And that's it. See, fast talk. I did it.
Thanks, Dorothy. We are at time right now, but I'm sure if you have questions for Dorothy, she'll answer them for you later. So thanks for coming, and I hope you guys all consider joining PERS and attending the meeting in Florence this April. Thank you.